Martin, here we are in beautiful sunshine in September.
Amazing, amazing.
Terrific. Mark 9 we're into, 30 to 37 I think it is.
Yep.
Second passion prediction,
Yep.
amongst other things. Thoughts?
So let me start with that second passion prediction. So in Mark's Gospel we've got a passion prediction in 8:31 I think it is, or at 33, in 9:30, 31 and in 10:33. So in that same sort of point in those three chapters.
Impressed with your memory recall.
Amazing, isn't it? Totally amazing. I don't remember much, but I do remember things like that. And this is the briefest. It is the most succinct.
Clip.
You know, the Son of Man will be betrayed, be killed, and rise again. And there are a couple of things about it. Actually, within the prediction itself, the key word, I hadn't appreciated this, but the Son of Man and then betrayed by human beings, or handed over to human beings, is the same in the Greek. It's anthropos. So there is a play here. So Mark is really trying to point out that it is the one who came to be, the image, the destiny, the model, whatever language you use, of human beings is being betrayed by those very people whom he came to be that for. So there's a little bit there about Mark's theology going on. But the other thing that struck me was the disciples then not saying anything. Jesus has already taken them. He's keeping quiet about his identity. We're told about that at the very beginning. So there's this whole kind of secret dimension that you see persisting in Mark's Gospel. He wants them to be with him so he can teach them. So he's taken this time apart for this opportunity, but they won't ask him any questions. Now, you can look back at the last prediction and what happened. He asked questions, and Peter answers, and then Peter challenges the prediction. So you can imagine that, as it were, at a human level, they don't want to ask any questions because they're going to get told they're wrong.
Yeah, get their heads bitten off if they challenge it again.
But then there is something else going on, because the whole process of question and answer is the process of learning, and that is deep in the Jewish tradition. It's deep in the Greek tradition, and somehow they are being prevented from learning. And so, again, kind of thinking about Mark's theology, there is, it is the work of Satan here that is actually preventing the asking of questions. It's not just that they're too timid or they don't want to get their heads bitten off, and therefore they are not going to find out what they need to find out because they're not asking questions. Now, just somewhat superficially, then transferring that to our own situation, I just wonder how many people are afraid to ask the questions that really matter for them about their faith, about understanding their faith, because either they're afraid of getting their heads bitten off, or that there's something else more darkly going on that prevents us being really open and puzzled and questioning and challenging and back and forth, because that is the way in which we will discern the truth.
Yeah. So one of the things that is preventing them from asking the right questions seems to be the fact that when he says to them, what were you arguing about on the road, the very road where he's disclosing, I'm going to be put to death and rise in 3 days, they, rather coyly admit it was about who was the greatest. Yeah. And, I always remember Bonhoeffer's remark about this, that at any Christian gathering, this is a question hovering in the background. Who is the greatest? Yeah. And it's a great danger with the spiritual life as much as anything else in terms of pride and the such like, And he says in this very passage, doesn't he, whoever would be, great among you must be the least of all and the servant of all. Something which, Paul emphasizes in Philippians 2 and elsewhere, that you've got to be the servant of all. And I mean, Gandhi goes as far as to say you have to become a zero and regard yourself as less than anybody else if you want to be saved. Now Gandhi wasn't a Christian, and he hasn't quite got that right, because if you're you have this tension, don't you, as a Christian? You're both a child, a son or a daughter of the King, and you're dust and ashes, and you have to hold those two together. But one of the things, coming back to your point, that's or the worst thing about this issue about greatness is not the fact that it kind of like elevates myself, and it's not the fact that it denigrates others, bad as those are, but perhaps the worst thing about this is it distracts us from Jesus. It distracts us from hearing what he's saying, listening to him, and following him as a result. And we see that classically here. They haven't even, the bombshell he's just dropped for the second time is as if it wasn't even heard, because they're still squabbling over somehow having picked up something about glory and greatness in what he was saying. So, so how do we kind of like resolve that in a way that kind of like, because there's something here that's important about greatness as well. And somebody who's helped me is Dorothy Day, the great Roman Catholic social worker from New York City, and she writes in her diary about the gory details of childbirth when she was a single parent, and at the end of it she says, if I'd painted the greatest painting, or if I'd sculpted the greatest sculpture, or if I'd composed the greatest symphony, I couldn't feel a more exalted creator than at that moment when I held the baby in my hands. And it led me to want to praise and adore. So there's something about the Christian ethos which when we espy greatness, it's decentering ourselves, and it leads us to the greatness of the divine rather than.
So yes, it's not about us. It leads us to worship. Just a couple of things. I mean, you mentioned Bonhoeffer, and I remember in Life Together, he's got that wonderful section where talking to or addressing the situation of seminarians in Finkenwald, where he says, basically, whenever you go into a room and you meet another person, the human instinct is to think, am I better than them or are they better than me? We've got this innate, I mean, it's the devil in us. This innate response, and so he goes on to caution, first of all, you guard your tongue and you don't talk about one another behind the backs. You only talk about one another to each other, and dispel that notion that you are, this is a competition. But then going back to the disciples and Jesus going to the house in Capernaum, something I was reading earlier was pointing out that the likelihood is that is Simon Peter's house, because that's the house that they were in much earlier on. And what happened there, but Simon Peter's mother-in-law was sick, and Jesus healed her, and she waited on them. So they're in that very context where they have a person who has demonstrated what being the servant of all means. So they've got this, the lived experience there in that particular context. But then you've got this reference to Jesus takes this child and hugs the child. I mean, embraces the child, we're told, hugs the child, and doesn't say, unless you become like one of these, which he does say elsewhere. He says, when you receive one of these, you receive me, and you receive the one who sent me. And I mean, there are various ways of trying to understand that, but one way is the obvious way about literally receiving children in a culture where children were unvalued, where with infant the killing of babies was prevalent, even to some extent in Jewish context. So there was something there about what it meant to receive a child, and of course there are echoes of Matthew 25. Wherever you give a cup of water, then you're giving. So there's something about greatness and not being like a child, but being willing to receive and embrace a child. That gets to another angle of, if one angle is about worshipping God, is how do we welcome
and that rich vein of hospitality that's kind of like running through that, isn't there?
And the hospitality
and the
towards
children.
those who for some reason or other end up being excluded.
Yeah, lots in this.
Lots of that. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.